On that moonless night, the sea lay still, a black mirror stretching across Iron Bottom Sound. The only movement was the slow drift of smoke rising from shattered destroyers, silent reminders of men who had already paid the price for a battle not yet finished. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, a massive shape moved blindly through the water, unaware that it had already been seen, measured, and marked by an unseen enemy. The air was thick with the scent of burned oil and the distant echo of dying ships. Every sailor who stood watch knew that whatever happened next would decide far more than the fate of two warships. It would determine whether an entire campaign survived the night. For decades, navies had trusted their eyes to win battles. But what happens when sight no longer matters, when the side that fights in darkness suddenly loses the night? In the next few minutes, a single decision would challenge everything tradition had taught, everything commanders believed, and everything an empire relied upon. And it would all begin with a glowing radar trace on a circular screen deep inside a steel tower. The night before the decisive encounter, the struggle for Guadalcanal had reached a breaking point. For 3 months, exhausted Marines had clung to the island with little more than determination and a single lifeline: the runway at Henderson Field. Every gallon of fuel, every crate of ammunition, every wounded man evacuated from the island depended on that thin strip of land carved out of jungle and coral. And the Japanese knew it. If the airfield fell, the entire American foothold in the Solomon Islands would collapse. To restore their dominance, the Imperial Japanese Navy prepared yet another night bombardment, one delivered not by scattered cruisers, but by a powerful task force led by a battle-tested capital ship. Their confidence came from decades of training in darkness. Long before radar existed, Japanese sailors had learned to trust instinct, optics, and the silence of night itself. They mastered the long-lance torpedo, fast, invisible, and deadly at ranges no American commander believed possible. They had proven their doctrine repeatedly, from the catastrophe at Savo Island to the bloody melee of November 13th. The Americans feared the night because the Japanese had turned it into a weapon. Yet this time the Americans brought something different. Task Force 64, 2 fast battleships, and 4 destroyers slipped toward Iron Bottom Sound as the sun vanished behind low clouds. Their advance was slow, deliberate, and silent. On the bridge of the flagship, a man who had spent his career studying the science of gunnery waited for a moment he had anticipated for years. He understood that the battle to come would not be decided by who saw first, but by who understood the new mathematics of detection. As darkness thickened, the destroyer screen formed ahead of the 2 battleships, fragile shields against the torpedo-armed hunters they knew were waiting. The sea was calm, the air heavy with salt and distant thunder, a deceptive stillness hiding the violence that would soon erupt. Every officer understood the stakes. If the Japanese force slipped past them and silenced Henderson Field, the Marines would have no air cover by dawn. If the Marines had no air cover, they would not hold the island. While Japanese lookouts strained their eyes against the black horizon, American radar operators watched clean, bright returns sweep across circular screens. They saw shapes, cruisers, destroyers, a battleship moving south toward Guadalcanal. The Japanese saw nothing. For the first time in the Pacific War, the night did not belong exclusively to them. And yet, despite this advantage, the Americans knew the danger ahead. The first clash would not be fought by the battleships. It would fall to the destroyers' small, thin-skinned ships that would have to face the full fury of Japan's night-fighting doctrine before their larger companions could even fire a shot. The opening blows of the battle were minutes away. The destroyers were the first to enter the killing ground. They pushed ahead into a darkness the Japanese had spent 20 years learning to control, and within minutes the storm broke over them. A single searchlight cut open the night like a wound its blinding beam, locking onto the lead American destroyer before her guns could even find their bearings. What followed was the kind of punishment only veterans of Iron Bottom Sound could understand. Concentrated fire from cruisers and destroyers trained to strike fast, strike hard, and vanish. Walker was the first to die. Her commander tried to evade, firing back with steady discipline, but flashes from Japanese guns multiplied across the horizon. Then came a single blast, violent, blinding, final. Her forward magazine erupted, tearing the ship in half and sending men into the burning water. Behind her, Preston surged forward into the maelstrom, only to meet the same fate. Shells found her engine room. A torpedo broke her spine. She rolled and sank in less than a minute. Venom followed, not from gunfire but from the silent killers the Americans feared most. A long-lance torpedo, nearly invisible, faster and deadlier than anything in the American arsenal, struck her bow and simply erased it. 60 feet of steel vanished. Yet against all odds, the ship stayed afloat. She drifted away from the battle, wounded but alive, a testament to the chaos and unpredictability of night combat. Gwyn, last in line, fought alone as the sea around her glowed with the burning remnants of her sister ships. For 15 minutes, the destroyer screen had held the line, just as they had been ordered. They absorbed the first wave of fire, the torpedoes, the fury meant for the battleships behind them. They paid for those minutes with their lives. When the echoes faded, the path to the American capital ships lay open. Then disaster struck where it was least expected. South Dakota, powerful, modern, bristling with guns, suddenly went dark. A chain reaction in her electrical system silenced her radars, her directors, her communications. She drifted into the Japanese formation, glowing like a lantern, perfectly silhouetted by the burning destroyers behind her. Within seconds, the enemy found her, illuminated her, and unleashed everything they had. Shells of every caliber raked her superstructure. Radars shattered. Rangefinders fell silent. Fire control crews were killed at their stations. The ship's armor protected her vitals, but topside she looked like a torn metal skeleton lit by flame. Still she endured, and still she withdrew, damaged, nearly blind, but alive. The Japanese believed the battle was decided. They had shattered the screen. They had driven off the second battleship. They saw the path to Henderson Field wide open. They prepared to reorganize and complete their mission. What they did not see, what they could not see, was the silent giant still waiting in darkness. Her radars were locked. Her guns were ready, and the man guiding her understood that the next few minutes would decide not just the fate of the night, but the future of naval warfare itself. For a brief moment, the night grew strangely quiet. South Dakota had disappeared into the blackness, and the Japanese captains believed the last obstacle between them and Henderson Field had been swept aside. Their ships adjusted course, confident, steady like hunters moving in for the final strike. But deep in the dark water to the south, another presence was waiting, silent, unlit, watching. When the order finally came, it was almost whispered. A command passed from Admiral Willis Lee to Captain Glenn Davis, carried across the bridge with the calm certainty of a man who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Radar traced a clear silhouette on the screen, large, armored, unaware. The distance closed, 8,400 yards. The firing solution stabilized, the guns aligned. At precisely 0100 hours, 9 16-inch rifles spoke at once. The blast lit the sky with a white flash so bright that men on distant ships saw it like lightning. In that instant, the silent giant announced itself. The shells arced high into the night, 2,000 pounds of steel and explosive, each rising into cold air before dropping toward a target that still had no idea it was being hunted. The first salvo struck like a hammer. Explosions tore through Kirishima's superstructure. Her bridge shuddered under the impact. Fire control positions collapsed. Electrical lines snapped and spat sparks. Men were thrown from their stations. The Japanese captain tried to understand what had happened, but the night offered no answer. Only fire, smoke, and the sickening realization that the enemy was invisible. Washington reloaded in seconds. The second salvo plunged through her decks. Flooding spread through machinery spaces. One turret went silent as crews rushed to prevent a magazine explosion. A third salvo arrived before damage reports could even be written. Kirishima began to list. Her steering jammed. She turned helplessly in a slow, widening circle caught between the physics of a sinking ship and the precision of radar-directed fire. For 7 relentless minutes, the bombardment continued. 9 salvos. Dozens of hits. Fires raged from bow to stern. Bulkheads buckled. Engine rooms filled with steam and water. The main battery fell silent, not by choice but by destruction. When the order cease fire finally echoed across Washington's decks, the Japanese battleship was already a burning ruin. Around her, Japanese destroyers scrambled to launch torpedoes. Dozens streaked through the water, deadly and silent. But Washington maneuvered like a boxer, slipping punches, turning hard to avoid each invisible threat. Torpedoes passed ahead, astern, alongside, never striking their mark. Luck played a role, but so did skill, training, and the discipline of a crew that trusted their instruments more than their eyes. By the time the battle slipped back into darkness, Kirishima was dying. Her list deepened. Compartments flooded beyond control. Fires consumed the superstructure. Crews abandoned ship as rescue destroyers came alongside. 3 hours after Washington's first salvo, the battleship rolled to starboard, hesitated, and slid beneath the black water of Iron Bottom Sound. It was the only time in the Pacific War that an American battleship defeated another battleship in a one-on-one surface engagement. And the cost, though hidden behind the triumph, still drifted on the waves men lost on destroyers, a battleship mauled, and a night that would be remembered for both victory and sacrifice. In the hours after the battle, the significance of what had happened was clear only to those who understood how navies evolve. For decades, surface warfare had been built on the supremacy of eyesight on rangefinders, spotters, searchlights, and the instincts of seasoned officers. But in Iron Bottom Sound, that world ended. The night no longer belonged to the Japanese. It no longer belonged to darkness. It belonged to the ship that could see without light. American commanders, still recovering from the chaos of November's earlier battles, quickly grasped the magnitude of the shift. The victory was not simply that a battleship had been sunk. It was that a battleship had been sunk by a ship guided entirely by electronic perception. USS Washington had fought the way future warships would fight through data, coordination, and trust in technology. In Washington, D.C., analysts and planners recognized the implications. If radar could allow a single ship to defeat a superior force at night, then doctrine, training, and command structures had to be rebuilt around this capability. The Navy moved quickly, institutionalizing what had been improvised during the battle. Combat Information Centers, CICs, were formalized, staffed, and standardized. No longer would radar operators work in isolated compartments. No longer would information move slowly or unevenly through a ship. The Pacific Fleet would fight through organized intelligence, not scattered reports. Abroad, the reaction was more subtle but equally profound. Japanese officers who had dominated night engagements for years now faced an enemy they could not see and, more importantly, could not predict. Radar did more than expose ships, it exposed weaknesses in an entire doctrine. Suddenly, the aggressive night torpedo attacks that had defined Japanese tactics became suicide runs against opponents who could track them from miles away. The psychological impact was immediate. Crews who once trusted their instincts began hesitating. Commanders accustomed to pressing the attack now pulled away at the first sign of radar presence. And with each engagement in 1943, American forces grew more confident. The balance of power in the Pacific shifted not through overwhelming numbers, but through mastery of a technology the world was only beginning to understand. This was the moment the Pacific War quietly changed direction. The victory at Guadalcanal was not only a strategic win, it was proof that the future of naval warfare would be defined not by who fired first, but by who understood the invisible battlefield that technology revealed. When the sea finally grew quiet again, and the glow of burning ships faded into the black horizon, a different kind of silence settled over Iron Bottom Sound. It was the silence that follows a turning point, the kind that historians later identify as the moment when the past gives way to something new. The battle that had lasted only minutes reshaped the Pacific War, not because of the steel that sank, but because of the ideas that surfaced. For Admiral Willis Lee, the victory was never about glory. He had no interest in proving himself, nor in rewriting the traditions of naval warfare for its own sake. What mattered to him was the cold, simple truth. Knowledge could win where eyesight failed. Radar had not just guided shells, it had guided a new philosophy of command. Lee understood that the officer of the future would make decisions not by what he could see from the bridge, but by what he could interpret from the electronic heartbeat of a ship. For USS Washington, the night's triumph became the defining chapter of her life. She fought in many campaigns afterward, protecting carriers, bombarding islands, standing watch in the final months of the Pacific, but she would forever be remembered for the minutes in which she fired blindly and struck with absolute precision. Few warships in any era get to prove a concept so decisively. Fewer still do it without taking a single casualty. Yet the deeper meaning of the battle lies not in the destruction of Kirishima, nor in the rescue of Henderson Field, but in the lesson that innovation requires courage. The courage to trust untested systems. The courage to break from tradition. The courage to believe that what cannot be seen may still be understood. The men aboard Washington carried that burden and delivered a victory that would echo far beyond the Solomons. Some scars of that night remain on the ocean floor, scattered among the wrecks that give Iron Bottom Sound its name. But the legacy rises far above the waterline. Every modern warship, every combat information center, every radar-guided weapon owes something to what happened in those 7 minutes. It was a reminder that even in war, progress does not come from strength alone, only from the willingness to change. And perhaps that is the question worth asking today. What other breakthroughs lie just beyond the edge of what we can currently see? History, after all, is still being written one decision, one innovation, one moment of clarity at a time. If you value stories like this, stories of courage, strategy, and the turning points that shaped our world, consider subscribing and share your thoughts below. What do you believe is the greatest lesson from that night off Guadalcanal?